Birthplace of many famous people throughout Russian history: Alexei Brusilov, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, and of course the infamous Joseph Stalin, was all born in the Transcaucasus country of Georgia. In 1881, the reforming Tsar Nicholas II was assassinated by the Russian populace in St. Petersburg. His successor and his son Alexander III was more of an autocratic and frowned upon any expression of nationalist independence as a threat to his empire. In an effort to introduce more central control, he abolished the Caucasus viceroyalty, reduced Georgia's state to more than a province of Russia, and the study of Georgian language was discouraged, and the very name Georgia was actually removed from any newspaper and banned, of course. In 1886, a Jordan student was killed in the reactor of the Tbilisi cemetery in protest. When the agent Dmitry Kananet criticized the head of the Church of Georgia for attacking the cemetery students, he was exiled to Sevastopol, where he was mysteriously murdered. Many Georgians believe his death to be the work of the Tsarist agents and mounted a huge anti-Russian demonstration at his funeral. At the same time, ethnic tensions were growing between the Georgians and the Armenians. Since the emancipation of the Serbs, had many Georgian nobility had gone into decline. Unable to compete with the new economic circumstances, many had abandoned their estates to join the Russian state service or live the playboy lives in the cities. Chief beneficiaries had been the Purpose Armenians, who bought up all their lands in the cities, especially Tbilisi. They had no longer formed the majority of the population as they had at the turn of the 19th century. Armenians had mostly civic posts and owned much of the businesses. Georgians felt very unrepresented in the city, especially Tbilisi, as they regarded it as their capital. So the Russian Revolution of 1905 struck everywhere, and in the late 1890s and the early 1900s, they were marked by frequent strikes throughout Georgia. The peasants, too, were also disconnected, and the Social Democrats won the peasants and the urban workers over to their cause. At this stage, the Georgian Social Democrats saw themselves as a part of an all-Russian political movement. However, at the Second Congress of the All-Russian Social Democrat Parties held in Belgium in 1903, the party split into two inconceivable groups: the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks. In 1905, the Social Democrat movement in Georgia had overwhelmingly decided in the favor of the Mensheviks and their leader, Neo Zarianada. One of the few Georgians to be in the notable position in the Bolshevik faction was the young Yosef Jugvashvili, better known as Joseph Stalin. In January 1905, the troubles within the Russian Empire really came to a head when the army fired upon the crowd of demonstrators in St. Petersburg, killing at least 96 people. The news provoked the wave of protests and strikes throughout the country, which became more known as the 1905 Revolution and Revolt. The unrest quickly spread to Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and so forth. But within Georgia, where the Mensheviks had recently coordinated a massive peasant revolt in the Georgia and the Gora region, the Mensheviks were again at the forefront during a year which saw a series of uprisings and strikes meant to be by the Tsarist authorities, with a combination of violence, repression carried out by the infamous Cossacks, and the concessions of these revolts. In December, the Mensheviks ordered the general strike and encouraged their supporters to bomb the Cossacks within their Don region. They bombed the Cossacks in the Don region, who then responded with more bloodshed. The Mensheviks resorted to violence and alienated many people, including their Armenian political allies. All resistance to the Tsarist authorities were quelled by the forces in January 1906 with the arrival of the army led by General Alikhanov. The year between 1906 and the outbreak of World War I was mostly peaceful for Georgia, which was now under the rule of a relatively liberal governor of the Caucasus, Count von Rostov-Dashkov. The Mensheviks too had realized they had gone too far with the violence in 1905, unlike the Bolsheviks, who had now rejected the idea of armed insurrection. In 1906, the first elections for the National Parliament, the Duma, was held in the Russian Empire, and the Mensheviks won these seats representing the Georgians in a landslide. The Bolsheviks had little support except for the manganese mine of Kultara, though they had gained publicity with the armed robberies to gain funds, especially in Tbilisi, Georgia in 1907. After this incident, Stalin and his colleagues moved to Baku, the only real Bolshevik stronghold in the Transcaucasus. Russia entered World War I against Germany in August 1914. The war aroused little enthusiasm for the people of Georgia, who did not see much to gain from this conflict, although 200,000 Georgians were mobilized to fight in the army. When Turkey joined the war on Germany's side in November, publicly, Georgia found itself on the front line immediately. Most Georgian politicians remained neutral. However, they had pro-German feelings and sensed that the independence was within reach, and that began to grow amongst the population. In 1917, as the Russian war effort collapsed, the February Revolution broke out in St. Petersburg. The new provisional government established a branch of rule in the Transcaucasia called the Azakom, the Extraordinary Committee of the Transcaucasia. There was also tensions in Tbilisi since the mainly Russian soldiers in the city favored the Bolsheviks. But as 1917 went on, the soldiers began to desert and head northwards, leaving the Georgians virtually free from the Russian army and in the hands of the Mensheviks, who rejected the October Revolution that brought on the Bolsheviks to power in the Russian capital. Transcaucasia was left to feud for itself, and the Turkish army began to encroach across the border in February 1918. The question of separation from Russia was brought to the forefront. On the 22nd of April 1918, the Parliament of the Transcaucasia voted for independence, declaring itself to be the Transcaucasian Democratic Federation Republic. It was only to last for a month, however, as the new republics made up of Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan each had their own different histories, cultures, and aspirations for independence. The Armenians were well aware of the Armenian genocide in Turkey, so the defense against the invading army was paramount. While the Muslim Azeris were also sympathetic to the Turks, the Georgians felt that their interests could be best guaranteed by the coming deal with the Germans rather than the Turks. On the 26th of May 1918, Georgia declared itself independent and a new state was born, the Democratic Republic of Georgia, which would only enjoy a brief period of freedom before the Bolsheviks had invaded in 1921. And so falls another state to the USSR, Georgia, the birthplace of Stalin. And so another country falls to the USSR, Georgia, home of Stalin, Brusilov, and Lenin. One by one, Armenia's next. And that ends up the Transcaucasus. And that makes up the Transcaucasus, my bad. Stay tuned for Armenia, which will probably be the last minority report, pretty much. Learn something, my dudes.